Hello and welcome to Games in Time. Now, the usual show for Games in Time that we've been starting over at Rhymes with Asia on YouTube and at rhymeswithasia.com. Short 10-minute podcasts recapping the game news. I do miss the longer form of podcasting though. And so I think it's more of a when I feel like it kind of thing. We're going to kind of break out and do these longer podcasts, whether it's catching up with different people or delving into specific topics. And this is one that I wanted to do for quite some time after beating this game this year. It's Danganronpa V3, Killing Harmony. It came out at the end of September, and after beating it, I know there was one other person who was playing this obsessively, and I had to talk to him about this. Please welcome Alex O'Neill from IrrationalPassions.com.
Thank you for having me on, Peter. I'm excited to talk about Danganronpa.
I think this is a game where there are just so many spoilers. I mean, when you're talking about 6 chapters, and each chapter is a murder mystery, who is going to have, who dies, first of all, who's the culprit, how does it get there, what are the underlying stories in Danganronpa, how does it fit into the overall Danganronpa universe? There's so much, and you can't just dance around it all. So I know you played this game, almost obsessively. I remember seeing your tweets over at AlFighter27 on Twitter, and you're saying there hit a point I couldn't put it down. This is like a 40+ hour game. It gets intense. Yeah. So I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts, and we can talk just briefly before going into very detailed spoilers and all that in case people are interested what Danganronpa is V3 worth it? Can you play the game without the others? Just, I guess, your initial impressions maybe going into playing V3 and then maybe coming out of it.
So going into it, I went in pretty much blind. Like I hadn't even seen half the characters. I had wanted to play. They put out a demo of it, which is like not content that ends up being in the game, but is a nice little taste of the characters and their banter and how the systems work when it comes to the actual mechanical parts of the game, which are the class trials. So I hadn't even gotten to play that. So going in pretty much blind, but having obviously played the first 2 when they come out in 2014, big fans of those. For me, the upper echelon of the series is that first one because of how it took me. It's such a roller coaster ride, and it takes you on such a good trip too. I think this one definitely harkens back to that more than Danganronpa 2, which is like off the rails, completely crazy. Yeah. And 3 is crazy too. Don't get me wrong; they're all absurd, but the setting and the way it's paced out and the way the characters and all kind of interact with one another really reminds me of that first game, and I really like how it kind of plays itself out in regards to those first 2. I do think I feel like you could probably jump into this one and still have a really great time, but it definitely helps that you played the first 2.
Yeah, I think 2 was very, very dependent on the first one being completed. This one, through a certain point, as I believe you also said on your Irrational Passions podcast as well, through a certain point, you can get away with it. I mean, they really establish these characters as individuals on their own without any other ties. It's not like 2 where you had an initial character who had questionable ties back to the first game. But yeah, this one you could play on your own for a while, but when you start to get into end game stuff, I think it's important to have at least cursory knowledge of at least number 2, but definitely of 1. But because you're right, I think the first game, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, really it was just a fresh idea. And these were PSP games in Japan, and they got a Vita version in Japan before coming over here. I mean, to have those first 2 games hit stateside, both in 2014, I mean, that was a lot to take in. Yeah. And I don't know, did you ever play Ultra Despair Girls? That was in 2015.
I did not, and I was worried going into it that there would be a lot of references to it. I think there's maybe like a handful at most, but I didn't end up playing it. I hear it's fine on its own merits, but it's definitely not essential to enjoying this game. Yeah,
it's fine. Totally different game. It has some cool little twists, I suppose, but it's not a killing game as Danganronpa is known for. And so I played that. I also played, or not even played, watched the Danganronpa 3 End of Hope's Peak High School anime, where, and I'm not sure if you got around to seeing that as well, because that was an odd one where they have two separate arcs. They have it going on Funimation right now for a dub.
Yeah, I haven't seen it at all, and that kind of closes out the story of the first two games, from what I understand.
Yeah, so there is the Despair arc, which is essentially takes place before the events of 2. It's the characters from 2, but their school life, before they get sucked up into the Jabberwock Island and all of that. So kind of how they became who they did. Again, trying to be light on spoilers for those other games. And then the future arc in that, and they alternated episodes in these arcs, so it must have been odd watching it when it aired, but I saw these two arcs just, back to back after the fact. This future arc, as opposed to Despair arc, it was a whole new killing game, but takes place immediately after 2, and it's Makoto Naegi and the Future Foundation, but a killing game has taken place inside Future Foundation. Okay. So it's kind of odd to see kind of those big holes kind of close, I suppose. But as far as V3 goes, I think I agree with you that I like the first one probably the most because of the characters are so memorable. Especially, for me in particular, Kyoko Hirugiri, to have her as that kind of stabilizing force in that game and then how she persists throughout the series, I think it's a really interesting stabilizing figure. Yeah. And I really like her as a second protagonist in a way. But yeah, I love the twist endings at the end of 2, but overall the setting and some of the characters weren't as strong, but I love how 2 ties back in the first one. This one, though, it is all on its own. So I also wanted to kind of highlight then the key game differences. If you played the first 2 Danganronpa games and you're familiar with the whole setup of it takes place in a high school or on an island, you have 16 skilled teenagers who are ultimates at specific talents. It kind of goes Battle Royale style, which is a big whole thing in video games this year. But Hunger Games, Battle Royale, everyone is kind of put in the same environment, and they're told they have to kill each other in order to escape, or otherwise they can't get out. When a student kills another, there is an investigation of who done it, and then it's the idea of the class trial where you have the Blackened, who is the culprit, and they have to try to trick the others into believing that the culprit is someone else, so that if the culprit escapes and is not convicted, they get to go free while everyone else dies. If the culprit is convicted, they are executed. And so it's a really dark sort of theme series. I think from the get-go, I always thought Danganronpa was like, it's so much like Ace Attorney in so many ways. And so I think if you're looking to get into the series and you're wondering what's a good sort of test series for that, it's Ace Attorney. It's a visual novel. It's a lot of reading and investigating and presenting evidence that contradicts statements. So a lot of, rooted in that series, a lot of inspiration from there. I would also put the Zero Escape series for a lot of its dark, grotesque themes. Definitely, some existential themes going in there. It's kind of influenced, I think, from there. And then you have a bit of light splash with favorite of ours, the Persona series, where you have downtime where you get to build social links with characters and kind of get to know them a bit better. There's a gift-giving aspect there to help speed it along. So I just love this series, man. Yeah. I really do. But the key game differences, I think when you're talking about what makes this one different, right off the top, they express it as lying is a big key. I mean, in the first game is all contradictions. The second game, they add, you can now agree with characters in the class trials and find your truth bullets, your evidence that supports what another character is saying. But this one, lying, I wasn't the biggest fan of it, to be honest.
Really, I like that it's mostly optional, and you can basically, I think they call it like backdoor evidence. I used it a couple of times.
Did you really? Wow.
Yeah, I found it. They're like, I guess, like hidden ways around it. I didn't there was usually like 2 or 3 per trial, and I would usually find 1 or 2. never all of them, but I thought it was cool in how you can manipulate things, and it does lead to different conversations, but it all kind of railroads back onto where you're supposed to be. But some of the circumstances are more very funny and humorous to just kind of take you off the rails and then back onto it. Mm-hmm. It's a fun manipulation game, I guess.
Did you see if it ever, like, I guess it would be hard to say, your first time through, it's such a long game after all, but they presented as the idea that if you lied in an accurate and effective way, that you could almost like skip ahead in the class trial, like, cut out maybe a good chunk of the trial. I mean, did you ever get the sense of that?
It did. There was one time, I think it was in the second trial, there was one time where it seemed like you can kind of distract away from this, because a lot of the trials in this game meander on a little bit too long, and they more meticulously go over things that you don't necessarily have to go over. So there's one point where they were just kind of exploring one person as a suspect, and I lied my way past it, and we just kind of like moved on. Everyone moved on with their lives, and that was the only time it definitely felt like, okay, that was cool, and that helped move this along faster. I think it's more of it's a longer conversation with more choices, and then if you lie your way through it, you kind of skip the part where it takes a little bit longer. But that's all.
Yeah, I did appreciate that it did seem to be an optional thing to do, because I did not like doing it, but there were certain instances where like they did force you to do it, at least in the first 3-4 cases. In the last couple, I don't think I was ever, forced to lie at all. I think at that point they kind of said, okay, we'll take the reins off a little bit. You can do that if you want to, but if you want to play, like a straight laced character, then by all means. So that was the biggest difference as far as the class trials went. They had all the different mini games. I liked the addition of the V counters. I think it added a little bit more of a pinpointedness when you were firing your truth bullet to get you some of those extra coins at the end of each chapter. Maybe it was just an extra little thing instead of just firing at this big word. You're like, maybe if I can try to pinpoint it precisely.
Yeah, I would say like a lot of the ones where it was like mass panic debate where multiple people are talking is really cool, and I like how that ended up working out. But it was, I think, the ones where we had seen that mechanic before, specifically like Hangman's Gambit, where they kind of tried to mix it up, where I was like, this isn't really working.
I hated to see the crossing swords, the rebuttal showdown. I hated to see that come back again, because that was my least favorite from 2.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think my least favorite from 2 is like the weird skiing minigame or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was just completely gone. It was kind of replaced by the Psyche Taxi.
Right.
But that was at least a little bit more enjoyable.
I liked the music and the whole like good and everything that went with the Psyche Taxi. But it went too long, especially when letters started moving more at the end. It's just like, I want to pick these up. Come on. Like, I shouldn't have to slow down necessarily. The breaking of the blocks, the mine was an interesting little mini game. I always was forgetting the pattern, so I could never use it effectively. But it was to a point where like, okay, if I break a few blocks here and there, it's not going to be a big hit on the time. Yeah, I liked the debate scrum when everyone was polarized. I think at certain moments it was really effective, but I didn't feel it was necessary to have it in every chapter. Yeah,
it was very much like, all right, here's the moment where we do our like magical girl transformation animation, and the whole classroom turns into a rocket ship or something.
Yeah, and it's just like, the whole animation, you couldn't skip it every single time. It's like, okay, well, I get it. Breaking down the character's armor at the end with the argument armament, it was different, but essentially the same as in past games. And the closing argument with the manga is always the best part of the games. Just try to piece everything together. Though I did have one instance where the game crashed, like right as I was putting the last piece in and it was trying to load up the here's how everything happened.
My goodness.
Hard crash, and I had to go back like an hour, skip all the text, and it's just like, oh man, I should have saved, as opposed to it was just at the halfway point that I had my last save at.
Yeah.
But just a random fluky glitch there.
I am curious. Did you end up playing on Vita or PS4?
I played on PlayStation TV.
Okay.
So technically the Vita cart, but on a big TV, and you got to download the high quality patch because there's one for Vita. I guess, there was a big deal when the demo came out for Vita where like the audio quality is not so good. And they're like, well, here's a 1.2 gigabyte patch with higher quality audio samples. And it's like, thanks. That's a big help. So interesting to play on PS TV. It wasn't too different. I think maybe some of the animations were a little smoother when you see the PS4 and the 60 frames per second, all that. But you still get essentially the same experience. I mean, you're still using a DualShock in the end. Yeah,
I played on PS4 because I'm like all for just all video games on the TV. But yeah, it was cool to switch from Vita to PS4. It was a good experience.
Yeah, and what made this interesting for me was my wife is also a big fan of the series, but it was always that I had played it first. I mean, in 2014, my wife's from England. She had not played them. It was when she moved over here, like, you have to play these. So play them later. But now this is a game that we both played together. And it was mostly just me controlling while she was watching, or say like, oh, spend free time with this person and all that. It made it a really fun game to experience as a couple. But it definitely also stretched out the time it took for me to play the game, because like you, I would have said like, give me a weekend, I will play this nonstop. But otherwise it's like, okay, we're breaking out in 2-hour chunks, and by the end, we spent like a whole Saturday, like 12 hours just going through it. So it was nice that it ended up working out that way. But that was interesting, and that could have only really been done on a TV as opposed to just headphones on, Vita lock check. So
the Vita does have the benefit, if you are playing by yourself, of like, in my case, waking up out of bed and on my day off and just grabbing it and then just like going right into playing it and never looking back. So
that's fantastic. Let's get into the spoiler section, though. If you've tuned in this long and you have not played this game, might be a good time to get out now. Just as a warning, this game starts out with one of the best first chapters of the entire series. And I'm trying to get my brother to play this game. He's doing things like he's got NHL 18 and he's doing some career mode in there, and he's like, oh, I want to eventually try Forza 7 and all. I'm like, you need to play Danganronpa V3 at the very least chapter 1. Get through chapter 1, see how you feel about it, because he's played the other two, and so you think he'd enjoy it. But how this one starts, and it's interesting you mentioned the demo. I tried the demo on PS4, and I didn't get the benefits because the save doesn't really carry over to the Vita version. But for the demo, cool to experience the characters. Interesting how it kind of mirrored a lot of the events of Danganronpa 1, but just kind of set in a new sort of thing with these new characters. So they're setting up, it's like, oh, discovered a body in your room, and oh no, they're in the shower, and it was Yasuhiro Hagakure from the first game who was the victim. So like, he's there lying out in the shower and the pink blood and everything, and so you go into the class trial, but it's all these new V3 characters. So that was kind of cool, and they made at reference at the end. It's like, oh, haven't we done this before, or something like that. It was kind of neat. But that was my experience with these characters, and going into it, a lot of the promotional material is all about Kaede. And I'm like, oh, okay. A female protagonist. She's got the ahoge, or whatever it is, the little hair flip bit that kind of helps determine, yes, you are a protagonist in the Danganronpa universe. And you're interacting with this, oddly enough, ultimate detective character of Shuichi, and he has a hat on. So I was like, okay, makes sense, detective. It's not the big old Sherlock Holmes hat, but it's a hat nonetheless. But I just want to get to the crux of it. The false protagonist was shocking.
The ultimate red herring.
Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting to hear people talk about this game and try to dance around this, like, oh, I don't want to spoil this bit for anyone because you really should experience it. You could even say it's right up there with swapping Snake for Raiden and in Metal Gear Solid 2, except without the deep attachment to Solid Snake. But I had not seen anything like that in the promotional material.
Yeah.
And so that blindsided me.
Yeah, like I didn't even know it was a female protagonist until I started playing the game. So I'm like, oh, this is very cool. And then, yeah, the ultimate red herring. And it was funny because going into that first class trial, I was thinking like, man, I wonder what a situation would be like if you were the killer. And then I just totally brushed it aside because it was just a random thought. And then everything started to unravel in front of me. And I was like, oh, God, what's happening?
Yeah. I mean, going into it, I mean, you're just thinking like, Shuichi. Like, it's Shuichi. Like, going into the trial, like, I hate to say it, but, you know, he's the one who set up the cameras. He would know how it works. I mean, he was there at the end. He went first. I mean, all those things you'd think would point to him. And, yeah, the fact that Kaede is the culprit, killing Rantaro, who was oddly enough, you know, asking a lot of questions. You know, he knew too much in a way. That was surprising. I mean, yes, this took place in the library with the shot put ball and rolling down the track and having the camera flash, lure Rantaro over and then drop. At least so it was presented to us with that evidence. Yeah, just a very surprising initial class trial when, I mean, the first game in Danganronpa, very straightforward, almost written out right for you. I mean, very by the numbers sort of case to kind of get you into the game. And then in 2 with the, you know, the poking through the floor and the pitch black sort of setup, that was also rather easy once you figured everything out. But yeah, this one, it takes what you know about Danganronpa, expects that you've played the other games, and then blindsides you. It's wild.
And I think that's one of the coolest parts about V3 as a fan of Danganronpa is the game lays down so many really excellent hints to where it would mess with your expectations, but takes you down a completely separate path because it knows you've played Danganronpa before. And it's constantly doing that literally through the end to the final moments. And even like this class trial retroactively by the end is brought into question, and the way that they kind of play around with that. And it mirrors a lot of the things that happen in the first Danganronpa specifically, but in a very different light and executed on very differently. And I really like that about it.
Absolutely. You know, I think it set an interesting emotional hook for the rest of the game because you had this new protagonist of Shuichi take off the hat, and you had that little hair flip. Yep. You know, had him constantly going back to, you know, keeping Kaede's promise, and she just wanted to help. She just wanted to have everyone get out and be friends and wanted to catch the mastermind, and that's why she did what she did. And have that always kind of go back to it. To have Claire de Lune be used, it's like coming out of nowhere. Like, man, that hit hard. Like that was
it did.
That was powerful.
And it was funny for me personally, just because of when this came out, I was playing The Evil Within, another video game, which uses the Claire de Lune in a very emotional, specific way. And I was like, man, all these video games using Claire de Lune. But yeah, it was surprisingly poignant. It was the strongest opening of Danganronpa as far as like getting you so invested in the protagonist's journey.
Absolutely. I wanted to learn more, so we went on to then Chapter 2, and everyone was kind of setting up their different sort of identities and their personalities, and you kind of were getting a sense of different people, especially when you're saying, okay, free time, go pick one. Like, who are you going to choose? And it's like, okay, I guess we started with Gonta. My wife really liked Gonta early on.
Because Gonta's the best.
Gonta, he's a cinnamon roll. He is too pure for this world.
He is too pure for this world. Also, like Rantaro, the unknown ultimate, as of course there has to be, gone right from the get-go. And I love that they kind of... I was always kind of half expecting Rantaro to come back at any point.
Yes.
And they just totally leave you hanging on that for the whole game.
Oh, they do. And yeah, one of the chapters they play with that in a very real way, and we'll get to it. But right when they get to saying that, like, oh, we're gonna have a magic show for everyone, and
I was immediately like, all right, somebody's gonna die.
Yeah,
here.
so what's gonna go wrong? And interesting to have, Ryoma was this kind of cherub-like character, but he talked with more of like a gangster edge, and he's somehow a tennis pro that was using his tennis skills to kill mobsters, apparently. For him to be freaking eaten by piranhas, that was pretty crazy.
Yeah, and it's another one of those highlight moments where, and I think V3 does it very well, where you see one thing and you're just questioning everything, and it's happening so fast. I think that happens like throughout all of the cases, and seeing him just floating in the water just to be torn to shreds is a really great moment in the same regard.
Yes, yeah, it comes pretty much out of nowhere. I was not expecting him to be the one who met his end there. That is for sure. And then when the case kind of carries on, I had the biggest difficulty pinning this culprit down, I think. So for Kirumi to end up being the culprit, Kirumi Tojo, the maid, I think it was just because I didn't want to believe it was her.
Yeah, because she was so helpful for everyone.
So helpful for everyone, and just overall a very kind of pleasing, calming force across the whole group, which had some very strong personalities, but the motive made no sense, at least at the time. So it took me several attempts before I came to the conclusion of, oh, like, really? And then shocked. Yeah, could not believe that. And then it ultimately makes sense, the whole idea with the rope across the gym with the pool and connecting Ryoma's lab to the magic show and the bit of fabric. It never occurred to me with the gloves, with like the rope burn and the glove that way.
Yeah, I think one of the big things there was like a name for the rope tying, or like the inner tube hanging off of the rope, that everyone just kind of casually threw around, like saying, "Oh, she made a rope way," and I'm like, "What's a rope way?"
I had no idea.
So yeah, but this was the motive video one also.
Yes.
Which is something, and I think another aspect from Danganronpa 1. But what was great about the motive video in this is that it became like this reoccurring, lingering presence over the entire game. And I think most of the motives kind of do it, because I think back to like the first motive in Danganronpa is like 100 million yen or something like that. Right. And when you compare to how sinister and horrible they get, it's just it's a whole new league of like these weird motive videos coming and going through the story. But yeah, the ropeway, the torn glove, the drama, the tension, the acting prime minister.
Yeah, like that was crazy. Like when you start to think for Danganronpa, like what's the overarching story? And to think, like, when you have that drop down, it's like, oh yeah, she was really the acting prime minister of Japan. It's like, what are you talking about?
They're going for gold, man.
Yeah, and I guess it makes sense because of how skilled of a character in many different ways she was. I mean, with cooking and cleaning, and it would seem to be no limit to her skills. But it's interesting you mentioned the motive video, because I think the big difference when we're expecting, based off the first Danganronpa, is Monokuma has all these videos, and if you don't kill anyone, I'll show this to everyone. Well, this one was the idea that they're all mixed up amongst each other, so some people may know others' secrets, and the kind of different tensions played off of that was really interesting.
And the aspect that some people got their own motive video in the mix, and always questioning what that would be. So
for Kirumi, like that came out of nowhere. That was another, I think, because we also started in my playthrough, we also started doing free time with her, and like that had to be cut short. And it's like, well, that sucks. Again,
I never invest in free time, because I'm always like, oh, the person I choose to spend time with is probably going to be the person that dies. Which was true of Rantaro right from the get-go. So.
Yeah.
they start laying out some groundwork here. I think this is when Gonta discovers the note, the ever-evolving note over in the park or the open area. And that starts playing into it. And the motive video is such a great... Danganronpa is very good at just really laying out the pieces, like all the corner pieces throughout the chapters. So you kind of have to start building the points to the center. And it always comes into a picture that you never expect. Especially at the end, after the trial's over, they have to have something to lead you going into the next chapter. And so, whether it's with the note in the courtyard or when they open on one of them and it's just like, it's a news report and meteors are coming down. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, or there was the one where it was the funeral for everybody. Yeah. And so then you start thinking of, similarities to 2 is this really a computer projection? Is everyone dead? Are they living in this virtual world? I mean, you definitely start using past knowledge of games and see what are they bringing over? What knowledge can I use to maybe start making sense of what's going on? How could we have guessed though? Yeah, no, totally. And then I don't know how you haven't mentioned it yet, but the Mono Cubs, the Monokuma Cubs were a pretty important piece. I mean, instead of just Monokuma and the mastermind with everything, I mean, you have these 5 other entities that, for what it's worth, one of my favorite tracks on the soundtrack when they appear with the 1, 2 he is all that remains of a once powerful nation. Like, all of that is just like, maybe the Rise and Shine or sign gets a little tiring after a little bit, but all their different personalities as well just kind of adds into the mix. And going into it, you don't really expect Monokuma Cubs. Though if you played Ultra Despair Girls, they had Shirokuma and Kurokuma, which is like an all white and all black Monokuma. Kurokuma is like this gangster sort of type, and then Shirokuma is like this helpful sort of Monokuma character, and they have some interesting tweaks. I don't want to spoil that. If anyone really wants to go back and play Ultra Despair Girls, that's one of the cooler twists at the end of that game. But to have 5 of these characters and then they're all dying off one by one at the end of the chapters, so it kind of gives you a sense of progression. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Something's happening here. Yeah, it's all little stuff that makes the 40 plus hours of the game kind of feel like they are going forward too. And some people do say that the later chapters, there's an issue with pacing overall with the game, but I think at least in the earlier chapters to kind of set it up, and it really, really gets moving in that direction. So let's get to chapter 3. There was a case in the first Danganronpa game where you had 2 deaths, kind of almost... In a way, it was back to back. They were kind of discovered close to the same time. There was a bit of the discrepancy with Taka and then Hifumi were the 2 that died. And, Taka died first, and then Hifumi, staggered in, and then, it was Celeste in that case who crushed it. But I think the staggering of the 2 deaths, for the second death to happen mid-investigation, also... groundbreaking and shocking for this game. Yeah. To it happen right in front of you also. Yes. That you were a possible potential suspect. So it started with Angie, and her and Atua was, I was, in a way, I was kind of glad that she was killed, because it was starting to get a bit old. But also then when you start adding the bits with the religious cult, and everyone was bought in, and everyone's got to have their curfew, it's okay, it's time for you to go. But then Tenko to be, in a way, the sacrificial lamb in this the ritual with the prayer circles and all of that. This all ties back to the Necronomicon and the idea that maybe we can bring someone back, and it really got you thinking, is Rantaro going to come back? This was that kind of brings the thought into play, especially when you start thinking virtual world could be entirely possible. Yeah. It's not out of the realm of Danganronpa possibilities. Right. That's easy way to put it that way.
But yeah, this is the one with the seesaw stomping, and Korikiyo is the culprit in this one, which is interesting because it seemed like the most straightforward one. When you start talking about all these examples of the occult and rituals and things like that, and he had such a deep interest in that as an anthropologist, it almost felt a little anticlimactic to have it be him to be the culprit.
This is, I think, probably the weakest trial just because of how long it goes, but also because of the culprit. But I think it sets up a lot of like character stuff in motion. Himiko, I think, goes the most places here. And Kokichi, obviously, you start to kind of peel back the layers, is because he's a thorn in the side always, but this is when things start really going off the rails for him, with how he tries to mislead the trial and everything.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's more of, I think the things going on around the trial are more interesting than the actual trial itself.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the timing of Angie being killed, as she discovered the whole trap with the seesaw, that felt like not maybe the best way for her to go. I would have wanted to see something more of the whole idea of when she was being spun and the katana cut something to create the locked room and all that. I think that was a pretty neat thing to discover and kind of piece out there.
There's never a Danganronpa game without a locked room mystery.
You got to have it. At least it wasn't a suicide this time around. So there you go.
Exactly.
But yeah, interesting, kind of grotesque with the idea of the stomping on the seesaw to have it go right to the blade on the top of the cage. That was one where I felt like the different quirks that when you're figuring out the case, certain things like, well, no, the blood was on the inside of the sheet, so there's no way that it could have been done outside of the sheet, and little things like that. It's like it's all starting to kind of piece together, but I don't know if I necessarily saw the whole like stomp on the seesaw thing until it was laid out there.
Yeah, it's just that the loud slam during the seance when you're doing it is just like the most, oh god, I don't know if I want to know what's happening after this is done.
They kind of set that up in a very interesting way. And then Kiyo's character breakdown of the split sister personality. Oh man, I don't know if we've seen anything like that in Danganronpa.
It's very much the Jack kind of subplot from the first game.
Yeah, the genocide Jack. Yeah, for sure.
It goes full Danganronpa, that's for sure.
But right up to the execution there, and to have him, you were almost hoping that Kiyo wouldn't be such a creepy character that he initially appeared to be, but it's like, no, you are every bit the creep ball and more. Yeah,
and also I guess serial killer.
Yeah, certainly with friends for his sister. And that's why it's always women and gross.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had definitely the developing stories, as you mentioned, of, Kokichi was kind of just trying to mess with things, but, it really started to build towards his villainy. And interesting, I think, his character arc overall for a game that was, set up as you can lie in these cases, for him to be such a consistent, nonstop liar, the supreme ruler of the world. Well, is that really the truth, or are you just lying? Is that the truth, or are you just lying? Kind of had for me some interesting parallels to current American politics with people who constantly lie.
Yep.
So that was interesting to kind of play off of, especially when the game came out in Japan, before the election. So that was interesting to consider. But yeah, his growth of villainy, or at least portrayed villainy. You had Maki, who's no longer the ultimate child caregiver, but full out assassin. Okay, ultimate assassin. That's new. That plays an interesting role. And then if you spent more time with her in free time, you kind of go a little more into how she became that way. You definitely had Kaito's illness of the coughing and am I gonna make it through the game? With you're doing the whole workout with Kaito and Maki, and you're kind of building that little friend group. But Kaito's not showing up because he keeps coughing or not feeling well. And as we mentioned, the Monocubs being killed off over time. A lot of different threads going on here. All the while you're wondering what's with everyone being dead. What's with the meteorites? Is there a world to go back to? Again, echoing back to Danganronpa 1.
Like, it's hard to get into kind of where they're leading those threads without like explicitly going right to the ultimate ending. But there's so much to kind of contemplate, like retroactively looking back at that game and where they're going with characters with how that game ends. Yeah,
because they're all kind of laid out at the start of the chapter when you're opening up the new area, and everyone's like, oh, you got to find the different things to open up, maybe find some new labs for different characters, and then the flashback light. And the flashback light always kind of helps propel that story a little bit more because it's represented as, revealing truths to these characters about them or the world. And it definitely breadcrumbs it in a very interesting and unique way. So we get to chapter 4, and they're like, no, straight up virtual world. Like, let's put on the PlayStation VR in a way, as it were, and go right into the virtual world. And so I think it plays off of what we were maybe pondering, that, well, if this is virtual already, is it just an easy thing to do to say, just have the consciousness go into this 8-bit, 16-bit sort of setting? Interesting to consider there. This was Miyu's death. Mm-hmm. This is definitely trying to set up a death for Kokichi because he was starting to become, pure evil at this point. Not, hell-bent at a later point, but, definitely becoming a problem. And so Miyu's trying to set up something in which he dies, set up the poison outside. But yeah, definitely did not expect her to have, the tables turned that way, especially when in the virtual world, like, she does the whole thing with the bridge, and she's, showing like the bridge goes down the river, and it's like, well, what are you doing? Like, it was a little odd that way. But yeah, this is the whole case of, there was the invisible wall between, what we thought were the left and right sides were actually not a barrier at all. It was actually down the middle that was the problem. So when characters could be, sledded down the side of a building and across that invisible wall, or across that boundary. And then there's the whole thing. Yeah. She dubbed herself an item so that she could move past or something like that. It was such a weird little trick. I think I figured out that whole left and right side thing pretty early on, but it was just the sequence of events. And then for it to end up, in the hands of Gonta to be the culprit. That hurt.
Emotional kind of falling apart. And also like the whole kind of scene toward the end of the class trial where, virtual Gonta is kind of recalling his memory back to real Gonta. And he like genuinely didn't know what happened. God.
Yeah, the whole bit, you had that truth bullet where it was just, what happens when you mix the red and the blue and the left and the right? And it's like, it's where you hold your chopsticks. And it's like, what? It's the other hand. It's like, oh, no, come on.
Yeah. And it is kind of heartbreaking going off of like what we see Kokichi had learned at the end of the previous trial, and him kind of like revealing that to Gonta and manipulating him.
Yes, yeah, and like him saying that he knew that there's the end of the world, there's no world to go back to. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely easier to sway virtual Gonta, who had no memory of that. That one was a bummer to go through.
Yeah, I think it's a good trial because it takes place in a video game and it uses video game mechanics as part of the trial. It's very clever in that regard.
Yeah, the whole scrolling of the screens and all that. Yeah, it was interesting.
But it's so heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. And by the end of this one, you have Kokichi coming to full power. His sprite where it's like the doom purple aura and he gets the crazy circular eyes. It's like, oh shit. Like what's wrong with you now? This is, he tells everyone of the end of the world. Everyone gets in kind of a malaise for the next chapter of the despair and the hopelessness of what can we do.
Going through that little platforming section with the hammers.
Yes.
And finally being able to conquer that.
Playing that the first time was, I had no idea. Like, it's like, is it really supposed to be this difficult? Like, what gives?
I gave up hope pretty quickly that it was at all possible.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm sure there's probably like some MLG Pro run of that on YouTube or something.
Some tool-assisted speed run, yeah.
Although I wonder how it breaks the game if you do get to that ending before you're supposed to.
Yeah, good point.
But yeah, it goes full evil Kokichi. I am the supreme leader. I am the mastermind. Kind of. It is.
The world will be mine. The text on that stone outside. The completion of that thread.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, I like that Gonto was the one checking that, and it is not really reflected until much later. What the characters see that, and the characters understand that. So, it's very cool.
So, chapter 5, we get into. I think Maki's hell bent on wanting to stop Kokichi at any point, at all costs, and Kaito's been held captive by Kokichi. You start getting into stuff with the exosols that kind of come back into play, and the electro hammer to disable one of them. You had the electro hammer to get past that electrified fence border, and you discovered where the exosols are being held. Kaito's being held and kind of captive in the bathroom, and he's getting worse and worse with his illness, and so how much longer is he gonna be held there? It was definitely an interesting trial where you had the unidentified remains, and then either Kaito or Kokichi in the exosol, looking for a while there that Maki could have been the killer. I mean, she was the crossbow there, and Himiko saw, or brought the bag that could only have been the crossbow, which then Kaito knew how to put together, set up from a previous story event. And so a lot of things are going into place, and you're like, Maki, no, you can't have been caught. You're an assassin, the ultimate assassin.
Yeah, this was one that I had actually kind of figured out just because of the very meticulously set up video camera for the actual murder, and I kind of realized what must have gone down, and then that whole kind of mid-class tangent where it's revealed that Maki actually did poison Kaito. It's very good at misleading you, even if you have kind of come to the right conclusion mid-trial.
Yes,
as it always is. So, and
the exosol, when both are kind of going back and forth with. At first it's Kaito, then it's really Kokichi, and whose remains is it really? I think if you're used to video and editing, it's pretty easy to put together what happened, but it was kind of an interesting, maybe only slightly heartwarming character redemption sort of thing for Kokichi to try to set up the unknowable murder. In a way, it was kind of a flashback to 2. With Nagito and the luck and everyone trying to throw in the help disperse, but they really threw in the poison. So who really could have killed them? Tried to set up the unsolvable murder, but in this case it was the unknowable murder, the unseeable murder from Monokuma's perspective because of using the different cameras. I thought that was a really cool twist on it, and a slight redemption for Kokichi to have him be the sacrificial lamb, so to speak, and to try to help everyone else out. But then, Kaito to then also foil the execution, the punishment time. To
die of his own free will in a way.
Yeah, and then get to see space. Again, another flashback where, the rocket ship that goes up, mirroring the very beginning of the first Danganronpa game.
Yep.
That kind of, and then they even make reference of it as new version or version 2 or whatever. So yeah, again, it's a lot of callbacks and trying to build your expectations. And again, it all goes to the ending. So I think let's get right into it, because chapter 6 always so very heavy in Danganronpa games.
Yeah.
In the first game, it was really just trying to piece together what happened when you had the masked assassin trying to kill Makoto, and trying to figure out the dead and then dead again, the body swapping there to really nail down the full culprit. In the second game, it's the whole unraveling of Jabberwock as the virtual world, and really trying to piece that all together, and
going through the ruins of the Hope's Peak Academy.
Yes, and the whole twist with Remnants. That's such a big moment. So like that's all in chapter 6, and in this one, at first I thought it was going to be a little weaker by comparison. But then shit gets full meta at the end. So we start with the chapter 1 case revisit.
Mm-hmm.
And
which is great.
It's super, super great. To think that there's more that we did not see. Because we were all resigned to the fact that Kaede did it to sacrifice and save everyone. But if to think that even she was set up, it's a great additional layer.
Yeah, and I love and as soon as they mentioned the girls' bathroom, I'm like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So going into that trial thinking like, I've got this.
Yeah.
And then walking out of that trial thinking I don't have anything anymore is great, because they very much give you the tools to kind of start figuring things out to an extent. But also the kind of breaking down of the rules don't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, this is our 53rd go around.
Mm-hmm.
And, so obviously it goes full like, okay, hey, Danganronpa, what if this was all fake in a TV show and you all signed up for this? But I love that they introduced this, and it's absurd and so unbelievable. And you, the player, and the 5 characters are grasping at straws to basically make it so like that isn't the ultimate conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't just like introduce this insanity and then let it sit. I would say like there's a tendency with video games to do that, especially like like big late game twists. Like I think of like Metal Gear Solid 5 has a kind of a big one like that, where it just kind of throws this information at you and then leaves you with it.
Yes.
And that's how it ends.
Yeah.
But Danganronpa then spends the next 2.5 hours just kind of sitting in that reality.
Yeah, and you got to work through it, man. It's crazy.
And there is like a legitimate working through it and coming to grips with it. And I think where it ultimately ends up is something really poignant, where it could have been something really cheap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess going back to kind of the setup there and figuring out the mastermind, because it all hinges on the fact that there is a back door into the mastermind's chamber, as you said, through the girls' bathroom. I thought that was pretty interesting, but it didn't take until when they started saying, well, let's look at the alibis again. And I'm like, oh no. Yeah. Oh no. And it's like, so it took me a little longer than, initially discovering the girls' bathroom to begin with, because I didn't recall everyone's alibi. But yeah, when Tsumugi says, it's like, oh, and I had to go to the bathroom. So that, in the first case, like, oh, that writes her out completely. And I did find it odd going through the game, because like she was oddly quiet through everything. Like never really a suspect, never really, a player in any of these other cases. So for her to have such a prevalent role was really interesting, especially when talking about the cospox and the fact that she can't cosplay another real character, but then, and this is where you have to play, or at least have a knowledge of the first 2 games and their characters, when she starts going through every character from the first 2 games. It's such a cool, rewarding moment for fans of the series.
Yes. I like that the cospox kind of plays back into it as like, oh no, they are fictional characters. And it's like, oh God, everything just starts unraveling in front of you.
Everything's a lie.
Yeah. It's not even that Tsumugi is like the quote unquote mastermind, because obviously this is kind of unraveling to be a much bigger production than it seems. It's kind of like how they question everything, but they still leave it up in the air, just like they did in that first game. Like to the final moments when you're kind of faced with the reality of like, we got through this, but what does this mean? You still don't quite know one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. but it is cool to kind of like finally go back and understand, like, you know, what was Rantaro's deal the whole time, and what's up with the flashback lights, and and also, you know, all those mysteries that were slowly introduced throughout Chapter 6, like the hidden room with all the sleep pods in it and everything.
Yeah.
So I really liked this. Ultimately, I think at first brush, I was like, okay, if we're going to do this meta thing, I don't know how I feel about this, because it feels like it undermines the journey of the other games, right?
Yeah.
But I think if they were going to do it in a way that had a kind of more poignant message, I think they did it well. Like, you know, they have something to say about the way people take a work that exists and make it their own, and how people react and feel about a creator's work, that I think is really something that's like increasingly relevant in the video game space specifically. And I think they don't really shy away from that.
Yeah, it was really interesting that, you know, as part of the production of it goes, to see all of the people that must have submitted their faces to represent the audience, and all of the different screens, and to show all of those different faces there. That was, in a way, kind of unnerving and unsettling. That was a really cool moment. And for me, I think it all kind of went back to, is, you know, we've been referencing about how we just keep borrowing our knowledge from the previous games, and it kind of all ties back to that. You know, we believe that this, you know, fictional work it's real in the space of the game, we'd imagine. Like it's very real there, because we make it almost seem like more than it is when we bring it into our world. So I was thinking through the whole thing, and they play on the expectation masterfully. Like, all right, where's Junko Enoshima? Yeah. Where's Junko? Come on out. I know you gotta be Tsumugi in disguise, right? No, you're not. Oh no, she's really dead. Oh no, she's fictional. Like, so like that was pretty mind blowing. And there is a great kind of break for the series too, because it is always about, like, you know, the ultimate hope prevailing, and the cyclical nature of that, of like hope then is drowned out by despair, and then despair reigns, and then hope, you know, fights back. But like, is hope really hopeful if it's just leading back into this cycle? And it's also kind of taking that step back of the commentary on Danganronpa as a whole, of like, you love these games, but when you're in this game, is it really that great? Like, is it great to make these people that were once friends murder each other? Yeah, to create just the next season.
Yeah, like genuinely kill each other. And, you know, playing back those videos of everyone's application saying like, yeah, I have so many cool ways of how to kill other players. And it's like, it really starts to peel back this kind of visage of what Danganronpa is, because, you know, it's kind of pointing the mirror directly back at the player and saying, you know, this is you. How do you feel about this? Yeah. And it does it not in like a condescending or patronizing way. I think it does it well.
I totally agree. Yeah. And when they set up the whole thing that, you know, well, Rantaro was really the ultimate survivor. He survived the last season, and he was able to bring some knowledge into this next season. And the whole idea with the flashback lights are, you know, you could customize them to be a brainwashing device, and that truth was all, you know, subjective, and it could be customized in that way. So many just, you know, cool little twists. And yeah, in the end, when the first two games were all about hope versus despair, you know, the ultimate hope taking down Junko, the ultimate despair, for the third choice to be presented to say, end Danganronpa, to have the viewers tune out, it was an interesting, you know, third option. And I mean, yeah, all that went into it. I did not expect it to get so meta. And I heard going into the game that, like, all right, people find the ending to be very polarizing. You know, take that for what you will. And I'm like, okay. And it took like another day just thinking about it to like really come to grips on like what actually just happened.
And it is mind numbing. And I feel bad because like I had like a casual conversation with someone who had not played it yet. And he's like, oh yeah, I heard it gets like really meta. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I don't know what that means. But then like knowing that it really does dampen. It dampened kind of like everything everywhere of where it went.
Yeah.
At the end, but it doesn't take away the impact of like what clearly a lot of heart went into how this ending was being positioned to the player and kind of like the meaning there. And leaving like I like two things, like the one, how it leaves it where they're going back out to the world and it's like, well, maybe those first two things did happen. And maybe all of this was a lie. I guess we won't know until we find out. But also the second thing is how you get to play as each character at the end.
Yeah.
And it kind of continues what it lays out in that first chapter of like everyone coming to their own belief in their own, ending their own crisis in a way.
Yeah. It was a very interesting ending in that regard. And for me, as someone who had just previously had watched the anime and was expecting something based on the continual timeline that like those previous entries had been building out for such a radical departure, it feels like an odd thing to have V3 really be 53. Because even going into it, it's just like I think the creator says like, oh, the V is meant for victory, and I was just thought okay, like version 3 is the third game, sure. I think that's what most people would expect going in. But yeah, when we keep referring to it as V3 instead of just Danganronpa 3, like it's just interesting to always think it's like, well, yeah, there's a reason for that.
Boy, I could look at fake Danganronpa game logos all day.
Oh. It reminded me so much of the end of 22 Jump Street.
Yes.
Where it's one of the best ending credits to a movie when they keep coming up with sequel after sequel ideas. Yes. It really reminded me of that. And so I guess it'd be a kind of natural talking point to say, where do you think the series goes from here?
I honestly have no clue, but I've not been more excited because like, I think there's an easy way to just do another game. Like Danganronpa 4 doesn't address any of this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's totally insular, or it is in the same universe as those first two games. And it has enough hints to make us question whether any of it is real or not, that we're just left confused at the end of it. I think it would be more fun to really build off of this, but I just don't know where you would start with that.
Yeah, it's a good point. And because I don't think there are enough threads necessary to continue past this, unless it gets just super fucking weird, which I wouldn't put it past them. But I think give it a few years, for the series to kind of breathe a little bit, but then come back and give us another killing game. But I think put it in that kind of like 4, 5, 6 ranges instead of 55, 59, like kind of in that area.
Although if like the next Danganronpa game comes out and it's like Danganronpa 54, that would be very funny for people who have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, not even V4, just say 54. Oh, that's real funny.
Yeah.
They're like, do I have to play the first other 53 games?
Yeah, it's like, man, this series really took off in a way I wasn't expecting.
I mean, we make the joke about Final Fantasy, but geez, come on.
Yeah, man, Japanese games are weird.
That's the summation of the whole game. Japanese games are weird.
Yup.
What were some of your favorite characters, and like who did you have? I guess if you didn't spend much free time, you don't have any of the max level friendships, but just I guess some of the characters that you liked more than others.
I think Maki was probably my favorite. She's really cool, and kind of like once you start to be able to peel back her history as like the ultimate assassin versus the ultimate child caregiver is really cool. I liked Tsumugi too, because there is definitely like an earnestness in her backstory if you do get it. Assuming like everything that she tells you is true, you understand why she would be the kind of person to bankroll a game like this, and be the character that she is, because of her kind of obsession with other characters. I think those two stood out to me the most. Yeah,
I was working towards Tsumugi's friendship, at the end there. I maybe got like 2 levels in, but then he just, free time ran out essentially. So I got the max friendship for, let's see, Gonta, also Maki, Kokichi, which let me tell you, that was interesting.
Yeah, I bet.
essentially, like he kept trying to play games with you, almost like, a roulette sort of thing, or do the whole game where you take the knife and you spread out your hand and then stab between all the different fingers and try to do that. And you'd say like, oh, I have, 2 more games until I kill you, or 1 more. And like, you almost just got the sense that he was a little more playful and not as serious. Though he did drop this game in particular, the first couple chapters in particular, very big, and gosh, even in retrospect, it's very interesting to think about, but very big on the referential humor, referring to our world, real life media properties.
Yeah.
Because Kokichi definitely drops it's time to duel.
Really?
And it's just like, and like you're reading, it's just like what? Why? Like, why is this here? And like, there were references to Full Metal Alchemist, and there were references to, I want to say, like, what, Naruto and One Piece, Dragon Ball, like other different properties like this. And it's just like, why is this here? But if you go back and think, it's like, oh, it's the whole like meta and questioning that this is all fictional and what's really real. And so that's really interesting to think about. But yeah, he definitely drops that Yu-Gi-Oh reference in his character progression.
I will say, like, one of the best late game reveals is that Kokichi is just like the leader of a gang of 5 kids that do pranks.
Yeah, and just like,
he was just some innocent kid the whole time. And he was just like into playing the game and into living the lie because like he's a prankster.
Yes.
And it's just like this super depressing like realization that he was just way in over his head.
Mm-hmm. He feels like he's all that, but like he's not anything.
Yeah, and it's just like, oh man. Especially like knowing that like he was probably so committed to it himself that like by the end he killed himself, probably is like a little bit of relief to himself as well. And it's just like peeling back the layers of that character is just super depressing.
All I know is that to this day, my wife and I will occasionally drop the nee-hee-hee. It's just like, and it's just a little reminiscent of that. So yeah, I think it was just Gonta, Maki, and Kokichi were the ones that I fully maxed out there. I tried Kirumi, killed, tried Tsumugi, and that happened right at the end of the game. But yeah, like very interesting characters. Yeah, I liked Kirumi a lot. It was interesting to see a character like Miyu be so vulgar. I wasn't expecting that. Like, it's like I didn't hate it, but like I certainly wasn't expecting it. And then Kibo, to not only be, the robot character, which, threw in a lot of questions of how is this possible? And well, if it were a virtual world, I guess that could be possible. But then representing it as Kibo is like the eyes, the camera, the audience stand-in, and him to go berserk and start blowing up things like that. He was definitely an influential character. I did not expect Himiko to make it to the end at all, but good for her that she did.
Yeah.
So many. It's always interesting with Danganronpa games when you start and it's 16 characters and you're like,
who's gonna make it?
One, who's gonna make it? 2, how am I gonna learn all of these names and associate them with their talents and keep them all straight, essentially? Because it's so much to be thrown at you right at the beginning of the game, and it's like every time I just like, how am I gonna do it? But by the end, you're like, yeah, I recognize all these characters, and especially when Tsumugi is bringing everyone from the first 2 games back as the fictional character cosplay and the just twisting right into them.
Yeah,
super cool moment, but it's just like I know all these characters, and it's always amazing to see going into a Danganronpa game versus coming out of it, and it feels like a lot going in, but you recognize it all there.
It is really cool because like ultimately that's 48 characters that you've kind of touched base with, and seeing all of them in that final scene is very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's wrap things up kind of with, I guess, the game's overall successes and its flaws. I think a flaw is it is its length. It is such a long game compared to long. The 25 hours or so that you're putting into each of the first two games, and to say that it extends beyond 40 for as many nights as my wife and I we played. Granted, it was nice to have things to do each night, but it's just like I know that this game will end in chapter 6. That's what it always does, but when is it gonna get there?
Mm-hmm. And I love intrigue. Don't get me wrong.
For sure.
It's just I would say, like, I don't want to say it was poorly paced. I would say just like the class trials were probably too long, because there is a lot of meandering of like, well, let's close out this possibility and this possibility. And there are cases like that third trial where it's kind of scripted and you're like, okay, I kind of know where this is going, where you just got to get through it. And there are times like the fifth one where it's okay to kind of spend more time with it. But I think it definitely should have like up to the pace a little bit. And I think part of that is just all the different kinds of mini games that were thrown in there.
Yeah, a lot of mini games. I would tone down a couple of those for sure. Yeah, like in the third one, it's a good point. It's like certain things like Gunta being in the video room, and you had like there was only so much of the crack in the door.
Yeah, and like reaching the rod out and opening
and it's
the
just
other door.
like no, it's not possible. Like can we move on past this obvious point? So yeah, certain things like that. It's a good point. But when it comes to successes, I really think the biggest success is turning a Danganronpa fan's expectations on their head.
Yeah.
Not only just with that first chapter, which, oh God, I wish we could talk about, when it comes to Game of the Year stuff, and we're talking like narratives of the year, what remains to Edith Finch won at the Game Awards just within the last week or so. A lot of people put Nier Automata up there as a really good game narrative. I'd love to bring this into this discussion because it does so much with what the player's expectations are and all of the different mysteries within. But you don't want to spoil that first chapter of the false protagonist switch, being one of the best executions since the famous Metal Gear Solid 2 one. And like that sucks. Like you want to tell more people about that, but you also want them to experience it for themselves.
Yeah, and I think like if you're familiar with Danganronpa, like you and I, it's easy to kind of talk around that stuff when you're talking about the later game trials and whatnot, but it's just like it's hard to compel people like your brother of like, I really need you to just play through the beginning part of this. And I know it's going to take like 10 hours, but just trust me, it's going to blow your mind. It's hard to kind of get them in that position just because it's hard to even talk around it.
And that's even for a fan of the series, much less someone who's going fresh into the game. So I'm like, well, you really should play these first two games first. And then you go through this one. It's like, it is a tough order. But soon, they'll have the 1 and 2 Reload, drop in price even more on PS4. This will come down in price. You're already starting to see V3 at, $42 or something like that as a sales price digital on PS4. It'll definitely be more accessible. To me, it draws a lot of comparisons to like the Zero Escape series where, they have now the Nonary games, which are like the 999 game and then Virtue's Last Reward kind of in that package now on PS4. And then there's Zero Time Dilemma. And it's another series where like it all connects, it all makes sense, but I know it's a tall task to play these games, but I'm really excited to see what is in store in the future for Danganronpa, but also to kind of get more people into the series because in a year of Battle Royale, like this is one of the best examples.
Yeah, it is very much on the other end of how Battle Royale could be executed as well. Yeah.
So I think that'll do it overall for our discussion of kind of just breaking it all down and kind of giving a spoiler cast sort of outlet to really discuss it all. But Alex, thank you so much for joining me for one. Like it's always a delight to talk to you and someone who's
absolutely
experienced with talking about games, and you're a podcaster yourself over at irrationalpassions.com. I mean, give yourself a plug, please, by all means.
Sure. I host a video games podcast, kind of a general discussion podcast called Irrational Passions Podcast. And then we have another show on our site called Inputs, a video games news show. that is a bit more of the modern game podcast that is more focused and shorter and more about the discourse around games right now. So those would be the two things I go check out. We're doing our Game of the Year content. It's coming up soon through the last week of December and the first few weeks of January. So give that a look. All of it's on irrationalpassions.com. We're working really hard on it, so I hope you all like it.
Absolutely. And yeah, your Game of the Year content this year that's actually going to be really interesting. Tell people a bit more about that.
So typically before, I like to reach out and have a lot of guests, especially podcasters and YouTubers and streamers that aren't necessarily in the written foray of things, but have a lot of voices and been playing a lot of games throughout the year. Typically, I would sit down with many people and do their personal top 10 games of that year. And it ended up being kind of like more of a taxing experience because we had so many people I wanted to have on last year. So instead, I'm trying something different. We were doing 10 discrete hour-long video game discussions about 10 specific games. So it is a different host and a different panel for each game, and it is like just a list of 10 games that we think are, or we wanted to have conversations about, from Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild to Wolfenstein 2 or What Remains of Edith Finch, things like that. There are definitely like some omissions on the list, like Persona 5 we didn't do because we have our Persona 5 Spoilercast, for example. So we felt that was a strong kind of case or a strong example of a show that we did around that. And like things like Cuphead or PUBG we didn't necessarily do because we wanted to lean more into the more different conversations that we would have versus something that was a bit more mechanics driven.
Yes.
So it is not reflective of our ultimately what our top 10 games of the show will be when we come to that conversation in our Giant Bomb style breakdown of categories and whatnot. But I think it is 10 really cool games that in a year filled with really, really great games, we'll have very cool conversations about with tons and tons of different voices across video games. So very excited about it.
An incredible year for games. Absolutely. You were kind enough to ask me on the Danganronpa V3 show that you'll have for that. So really looking forward to participating in that. Thank you for thinking of me there.
Of course. Yeah.
It should be a whole lot of fun. And just overall, I mean, the year that it's been has been remarkable. Have you happened to formulate your own top 10 list yet?
I have kind of a rough outline. I know my top 3.
I'm asking more of them. I'm curious where this game would kind of fall around in what range.
I don't know. It like I tend to favor new games over sequels in my top games, in my personal 10 games. So like I haven't really nailed down a spot for Danganronpa yet, but I feel like it will be on the list, probably the bottom 5. But I really like this game. Yeah. I hope it ultimately ends up on the list because I think it's a really in a year filled with some of the best Japanese games ever. It is still a very strong contender, and that's saying a lot, honestly.
Yeah, it's kind of around I think 5 right now for me, and that says a lot in this amazing year. It is unfortunate that I don't think it gets as much recognition because it is a sequel and it is so dependent on knowledge of the franchise and other games in that series. But I wish more people could talk about it, more people could experience it.
It's worth your time.
Oh, absolutely. So that'll do it for this Spoilercast for Games in Time. Usually a shorter show, but occasionally I'd like to break out with some of these more longer forms. You can find the show at Games in Time Pod on Twitter. I'm at Pete Speak Easy. You can find Alex at AlFighter27. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you next time.